You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Coming up on today's programme, what is the future of Canada's Liberal Party and who will lead it? Following the resignation of Justin Trudeau, we ask what's next for the party he's credited with reinventing. Then,
drill, baby, drill.
Donald Trump's plan for the future of oil exploration may be scuppered as Joe Biden puts in measures to protect over 625 million acres of US oceans. We'll look at what else the outgoing administration can achieve before January the 20th. Plus, the Vatican bells ring out in celebration this Jubilee year as the Pope makes an historic move by appointing a woman to one of the most senior positions in the Catholic Church. And we'll raise the curtain on theatre highlights for 2025. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. The race to succeed Justin Trudeau as Liberal Party leader is underway following the Canadian Prime Minister's resignation after 9 years in office. Is his departure, though, enough to save the party? Well, I'm joined by Paul Waldie, who's Europe correspondent at the Globe and Mail. Paul, welcome to The Briefing. Trudeau assumed leadership of the Liberal Party back in 2013. Is it fair to say that he turned it around?
Well, I mean, he really did. In the election in 2015, the Liberals were in third place. They'd had a horrible election before that, and they'd sunk very low, probably to an historic low for the party. He brought them back. I mean, he ran an amazing election campaign in 2015. He was going up against an incumbent government that had kind of run out of steam, but nonetheless, he took the party from third place to a majority government and was seen as a real breath of fresh air and somebody who could not only reinvent the fortunes of the party, but really bring Canada onto the world stage in a whole different way. Now,
we've spoken a lot in the last couple of days about his resignation, what led up to it and so on. But why has he prorogued Parliament?
Well, I mean, some could argue that it's a pretty cynical move because the party needs to pick a new leader. And in Canada, that process can take a while. All the major parties have a long, drawn-out process where members from across the country can vote. So it normally takes as long as 6 months. They're trying to shorten that process to a couple of months. So what he's really doing is proroguing Parliament so that the leadership election can take place while the Parliament isn't sitting, and there's the threat that the opposition parties would bring down the government and force a snap election. So he's trying to avoid that by proroguing Parliament to the end of March.
And giving the party a chance to reinvent itself. Do you think that his departure will bolster support for the Liberal Party?
No, I really don't. I think the party has really gone too far now. Down the opinion polls. And I don't really see any way back for them in this election. Now, that's not to say, things can turn around next time, but I think they might get a slight bump in the polls. But even the best contender or the most favorable contender for the leadership still would trail the Conservative Party by many, many points based on opinion polling. So, no, I really don't think any leader this time is going to be able to get the party anywhere close to government.
You say it's a long process to choose a new leader. How does it work?
Well, normally what happens both with the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party is that leadership contenders can sign up members, or they even just people who declare themselves supporters of the party are allowed to vote. And they have national votes and they have provincial votes, and it gets a very complicated, long, drawn-out campaign process. It kind of mimics in some way the primary system in the U.S., not quite as established or as complicated, but it's along those lines. It's not, for example, like the Conservatives in the U.K. or even the Labour Party, where the MPs have a big role. In Canada, it's very much the party members and party supporters who decide the next leader.
And who's in the frame to be the next leader?
Well, right now we have Chrystia Freeland, of course, the former finance minister who caused a lot of this kerfuffle by announcing her resignation in December. She felt she was being pushed out. She left. She's obviously going to be a contender. There's some other people, Romeo LeBlanc. There's a former Premier of British Columbia, Christy Clark. And then we have, of course, Mark Carney, the ex-governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He has also announced that he's considering running. Might be a bit of a long shot for him since he's never been politically active in something like this before. So we'd have to see. He still, though, is suggesting that he may run. So there's a lot of people lining up right now anyway who want to throw their hats in the ring.
Right, but right now, when Trump assumes office, Trudeau will also still be in office, but as a lame duck leader. So how difficult will that be when it comes to negotiating tariffs and establishing a working relationship with the Republican administration, which seems set on bullying Canada?
I think it's going to be extremely difficult because the one thing we know about Trump is he's not going to take office on January 20th and wait a few months to decide what to do. He's going to be immediate in his decisions. He's going to be immediate in the tariffs he's threatened. He's threatened 25% tariffs against Canada in return for some vague notion of border security, which Canada has kind of been scrambling to address. But without a real government in the country, without a real prime minister who has some leadership ability, it's going to be very, very hard for Canada.
And so your prognosis then for the next election is really the Liberals can't hold on.
I can't see it, and I don't know that anybody would predict a Liberal win. I think the Conservative Party is too far ahead in the polls. I think the Conservatives have managed to tap into real discontentment, not only about the current situation of cost of living and that, but just kind of an exasperation and fatigue with the Liberal government. And that happens with any government after 10 years. It's bound to happen. So I think so many things are running against the Liberals this time. I can't see them. They'll be lucky to finish second in Parliament and be in opposition. They may fall as far as third or fourth. So I think it's a big rebuilding process for the Liberal Party.
And when is the next election?
Well, the next election has to be in October, but it's likely to be much sooner because, again, the Liberals only won a minority government. So they've been kind of on the cusp of facing an election call anyway. And now all of the other parties, the three main parties, have said they want to call an election as quickly as Parliament comes back. So I expect that the minute Parliament comes back on March 24th or whenever, there'll be a call for an election.
Paul, thank you very much indeed. That was Paul Waldie there. Now, here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. At least 95 people are dead after a powerful earthquake struck Tibet. The quake damaged more than 1,000 homes. Tremors were felt in Nepal, Bhutan, and northern India. Rescue teams are searching for survivors in the remote region. France is marking 10 years since the Charlie Hebdo attack where 12 people were killed by Islamist gunmen. President Macron and Paris Mayor Anne Hidalgo will lead commemorations at the site. The magazine has released a special edition calling itself indestructible. And Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has criticised beachgoers using cabanas to reserve sand spots, saying it's not on. Photos of empty cabanas have sparked heated online debate about fairness at popular beaches. Mr. Albanese called the practice against Australia's spirit of equality. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Georgina.
Thank you, Laura. US President-elect Donald Trump has had his victory certified by his defeated rival, Kamala Harris. He'll take office on January the 20th, but the Biden administration still has a fortnight in power. And joining me to discuss what this looks like is Washington reporter Simon Marks, fortunately for us in London for just a couple of days now. Simon, welcome back to the show. One person who appears to be making the most of every minute is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in what's likely to be his final overseas trip in office. He's visiting South Korea and France. He's in Japan today. Now, he met with the Prime Minister, and I wonder how strained that relationship is now in the wake of Washington's refusal to allow Nippon Steel to take over US Steel.
Well, I think it's going to be a problem for the Biden administration in its dying days, and then it will be a problem that the Trump administration inherits, because Japan, of course, is a close ally of the United States, and the Biden administration has worked relentlessly, especially through Secretary of State Antony Blinken, to not only to deepen that relationship, but to expand it and to bring South Korea essentially into a trilateral alliance with the United States. So this move by Joe Biden to say Nippon Steel is not going to be allowed to purchase US steel and to justify it on national security grounds without going into any detail about what the national security threat might be has really enraged the Japanese, who say, well, what's the purpose of deepening American engagement in the Asia-Pacific region and building on pre-existing alliances if, Japan is going to be treated like this by President Biden. Now, Biden, of course, has taken this move to please the labor unions in very large measure, who backed him in the election campaign, and he had signalled that he was going to oppose this acquisition of U.S. steel. I mean, it's got the country's name in the title, U.S. Steel, which is why Joe Biden and I think Donald Trump see this really as an opportunity to secure favourability from voters who say, well, why on earth would we be allowing U.S. steel to be purchased by Japan?
And Nippon, are they going to take legal action?
Well, they've filed lawsuits now, multiple lawsuits, in a bid together with U.S. Steel, in a bid to try and force this merger through. There's very little prospect of success in that regard. There is no precedent for a takeover that has been blocked by the US government on national security grounds then to be overturned in the courts. So this is an expression of frustration by both US and Nippon Steel, but it's very unlikely to lead to the favourable decision that Nippon Steel would like to see.
And it won't be overturned by Trump.
I think it's extremely unlikely. I mean, if you're going to make America great again and talk about America first, you're not really talking about the takeover of U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel.
Meanwhile, Joe Biden seems to be trying to Trump-proof the future of the planet. He's made a sweeping move to ban all future offshore oil and natural gas drilling. That's on America's east and west coast in the eastern Gulf of Mexico and Alaska's North Bering Sea. It's more than 625 million acres of US oceans. Now, we know Trump's drill, baby, drill mantra. Can Trump overturn this?
Well, Trump says he's going to overturn it. The difficulty with this, and it's another example of Joe Biden trying to batten down as many hatches as he can before Donald Trump takes the oath of office in just under 2 weeks' time and moves into the White House once again as president, is that for Donald Trump to overturn it, he will require congressional support. And on the one hand, you say, well, that won't be a problem because he's got Republican majorities in the House of Representatives and the Senate preparing to welcome him to Washington, D.C. But Joe Biden's been quite canny here because he is terminating the right to drill in many areas where coastal Republicans preside, and coastal communities largely oppose the idea of drilling. So it is not a slam dunk that Donald Trump is going to be able to overturn this.
What other hatches is Biden battening down?
Well, I think through, if you saw the Presidential Medal of Honor that he handed out liberally last week to a whole host of admirable Americans and in many cases political allies of Joe Biden, people like Hillary Clinton. We've also seen Liz Cheney, the former Republican Congresswoman, honoured by President Biden. He's taking a stand, essentially, in his final days to try and protect areas of American life that he thinks are at risk from Donald Trump. The environment's one of them. Democracy is clearly another. He's announced he's attending the inauguration. That's battening down a hatch. It's overturning what happened last time around. And he's really, I think, very, very determined to try and anchor America to its traditional values in the dying days of his presidency, absolutely mindful of the fact that the moment we get to midday on January the 20th and Donald Trump heads to the White House, back in the Oval Office, a whole host of executive orders will be issued that go after core concerns of Democrats and their supporters.
How seriously should we take Trump's pronouncements on issues such as buying Greenland?
Well, I mean, it's absurd, but I think we have to take them seriously. I mean, we now know that Donald Trump Jr. Is on his way to Greenland, apparently
viewing the property.
Taking a look at it, just having a look in a completely private capacity, you understand. Apparently he's going to be filming some material for his podcast as well. Look, Donald Trump has said that taking over Greenland is, for the United States, an absolute necessity 24 hours ago, he once again voiced the notion that Greenland needs to join the United States. He says he covets the opportunity to make Greenland great again. This is obviously enraging the local authorities in Greenland and Copenhagen. The Danes have already announced that they're shoring up defences in Greenland, not in direct response to Donald Trump. They said they were planning to do it anyway, but it's absolutely apparent that these things are tied together. I mean, there's so many complexities about this. You go out there and you basically threaten to take over Greenland. How are you going to take a stand against the Chinese if President Xi Jinping decides to go after Taiwan? I mean, there are foreign policy precedents here that you run the risk of creating, but he seems absolutely determined in the same way as he keeps talking about making Canada America's 51st state and sort of dismissively refers to the soon-to-be-gone Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as the governor of Canada. I think you have to take it all seriously.
I mean, are there grown-ups in the room?
Nowhere near as many as there were in the first term. I mean, that's going to be the real story of this Trump administration. He is surrounding himself with people who aren't just pledging loyalty to him. They have a demonstrable record of fealty to him. They are Make America Great Again true believers. He's not coming into office trying to find common cause with the adults who were in the room first time round. And so the restraining influences, the checks and balances, it's going to be a real test of those, I think, for the entire 4 years that we're about to begin.
I mean, he's very good at attacking the government from outside. Will he be able to run it from the inside?
He's going to run up against difficulties almost immediately. I mean, if we go back to the drilling issue, he may not be able to overturn that ban in Congress, and he may get angry about that. He may run into opposition in Congress to the mass deportation plans that he's got, given that you've now got Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy already questioning exactly where immigration policy is going. He's not going to be happy about that. There will be very early tests in this second Trump term of whether Donald Trump is willing to work within the confines of the Constitution and the democratic system that means the presidency is just a co-equal branch of government with the legislature up on Capitol Hill and the judiciary in the form of the Supreme Court? Or is he going to get frustrated and start to try and make end runs around those constitutional niceties? I think we'll see some very early tests of that.
Simon, you're back to Washington tomorrow. You're going to have a very exciting...
It's going to be busy.
Yes. I look forward to speaking to you.
And the same here. Thanks, Georgina.
That's Simon Marks there, and you're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. A woman has been appointed to head a major Vatican office for the first time. Pope Francis has named an Italian nun, Sister Simona Brambilla, to become prefect of the department responsible for all the Catholic Church's religious orders. This comes in the same week that the pontiff criticised nuns with vinegar faces and called on them to avoid gossip. Well, I'm joined now by Juliet Linley, who's a journalist and a former Vatican correspondent. Juliet's in our Zurich studio. Hello to you, Juliet.
Hello, Georgina.
How surprising is this appointment?
Well, this is the kind of person who often comes up with sort of surprising decisions, statements, and we'll talk about the vinegar faces later. So there definitely was no sign on the outside that this appointment was in the making. There are 4 women who hold high spots within the Roman Curia, which is the Vatican's administrative and governing body. But this is the first woman in history to head up a major dicastery. Now, the dicastery, there are 16 of them, and it's the equivalent of what you would call a ministry. Let's put it that way. So 59-year-old Simona Brambilla is the first woman prefect at the Vatican, and she takes over the reins of the dicastery that oversees, as you said, consecrated lives. So every religious order, priests and nuns all over the globe, Georgina, and including newer movements, as well as the better known, let's say, Jesuits and Franciscans. Now, just for a little bit of background, Brambilla trained as a nurse before becoming a nun, and she worked in Mozambique as a missionary for many years, holding several leadership leadership positions. But, and there is a but, Georgina, while she indeed has, if you want, cracked the glass ceiling by getting appointed prefect, at the same time, the Pope has named a pro-prefect as co-leader, and he's male. Now, why do you think he did this? Well, because as prefect of a dicastery, stay with me, you need to be able to say mass and have other, let's say, sacramental functions, which as a woman, Brambilla obviously could not. So enter Cardinal Ángel Fernández. He's a 64-year-old Spanish cardinal who spent many years in the Pope's home city of Buenos Aires. So as one Vatican insider told me, this is a bit confusing and a lot of politicking, Georgina, and perhaps it's not surprising, however, because it is Pope Francis that we're talking about.
So, I mean, she has the title, but she has to share the job with a man. It is, though, a hopeful sign that the Catholic Church is moving towards gender equality?
Well, let's note that it was Francis himself who reformed the Holy See's constitution to allow women and lay people to head up dicasteries. So that's important to note. But Georgina, things move very, very slowly within the Catholic Church, as you can imagine, given its many, many centuries of history. And you still hear so many complaints that women are very much considered, let's say, second-class citizens within the Church and at the Vatican. And this despite doing the lion's share of the Church's major work, let's say in hospitals, in schools. So often it's the nurses who are there teaching or taking care of patients. And to this day, although the Pope is very forward-thinking, if you want, with regard to women's roles, he has said on numerous occasions the Church is not ripe for female priests or even deacons. And I mean, the Roman Curia is only made up by 26% of women, so only 1 in 4 members of the Curia are female. So it's still very much a hot-button topic, Georgina.
Now, let's go to his extraordinary comments about nuns having vinegar faces and gossiping.
So the Pope's remarks came just a few days ago, and he was talking to a group of nuns. He was calling on them to be open and brave and friendly. And he said he was calling out on them not to gossip, saying that gossip kills and poisons. So he said, convey joy. And vinegar is ugly. So making reference to maybe sour faces that could often seen, especially perhaps in stereotypes, old-fashioned stereotypes of nuns. But this is so Francis, isn't it, Georgina? He's known for his sort of, let's say, lack of tact. And often he's outspoken. You've got to pity his press office, because so often they're really sort of trying to catch up with what he's saying and trying to rectify what he says. And as he gets older, Georgina, it's not getting any better. Let's put it that way. I mean, let's say, for instance, just last June, he famously used a Roman slang term, frociaggine. It's a really ugly term, and it's a homophobic slur. And I'm not going to tell you what it translates as, but you can imagine. And while speaking to Roman priests, he used it. And his point was that gay men should absolutely be welcomed into the church, but perhaps not necessarily into seminaries. Now, you can imagine the Pope's spokesman, Matteo Bruni, he responded saying there is room for everyone in the church. The Pope never intended to offend or express himself in homophobic terms, and he apologizes if he caused offense. There's so much crisis communication going on behind the scenes, Georgina. But, you know, as a parent, you'd be mortified if your child used that kind of language. So for the Holy Father to use it, the optics aren't that good, Georgina.
I mean, he's 88. Is this age related, do you think?
Your guess is as good as mine.
This is a Holy Jubilee year. Can you tell us more about that?
It is. So on Christmas Day, he opened the Holy Door in St. Peter's Basilica. And Holy years come around every 25 years. They're called Jubilee years. And by tradition, you open 4 holy doors in Rome of the 4 main papal basilicas. And it's sort of a symbolism for opening the door of salvation for Catholics. But as well, Georgina, aside from holy doors and things like that, the Vatican made an extraordinary move by featuring a cartoon mascot molded on a Japanese anime comic style. And it's a cartoon of a pilgrim, but drawn in very childlike, with childlike features, called Luce. She holds a staff, she has very muddy gumboots, and it's sort of to signify her trudging her way to Rome as a pilgrim. And this is very much an attempt by the Church, of course, to reach out to youngsters at a time in which the Catholic Church, especially, let's say, in Western countries, is perhaps hemorrhaging members. So quite how much it'll work, though, let's see.
I mean, but talking of trudging their way to Rome, the Vatican is expecting absolutely record number of visitors.
Record numbers, like hundreds of thousands. And the city of Rome in general has geared up. You know, you've got record numbers of Airbnbs. So many monuments have been are being restored. They recently took the scaffolding down from around the Fontana di Trevi, the Trevi fountain. So yeah, it's getting a bit of a new lick of paint all over the city. But already the city is heaving from having so many post-pandemic visitors that all my colleagues and friends who actually live in Rome are really, really sort of petrified of what this year will bring for them, living. Yeah.
Going around with vinegar faces, perhaps. Juliet, thank you. Juliet Linley there. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Well, finally on the programme today, I'm joined in the studio by Matt Wolfe, the theatre critic at the International New York Times. Matt, hello.
Hello.
Now, is it going to be a bumper year in theatre?
Well, of course, hope always springs eternal in January. If it didn't, it would be pretty depressing. And I just did a huge sort of piece looking ahead to the winter season of stuff coming in London. And it is very exciting. There are so many exciting names, new plays, classic revivals, musicals, so we'll see. I hope so.
Mm-hmm. Let's start with The Seagull. Why has it been called The Seagull Play? That's not what Chekhov called it.
Oh, is that? Well, I don't know. I have no idea. It's a Chekhov revival from Thomas Ostermeyer, of course, the acclaimed German director, who had an Ibsen revival of Enemy of the People on the West End last year with Matt Smith. So he has form in the London stage. He's known for reinventing the classics. What he will do with Chekhov's play, we don't yet know, but it certainly has the starriest cast of the season. As Kate Blanchett is playing Arkadina, the preening actress and mother at the heart of the play. Emma Corrin as the sort of young actress Nina, much put upon. Very interesting to see Cody Smith-McPhee, former Oscar nominee for The Power of the Dog, making what I think is a professional stage debut, certainly in the UK, as the anguished son Constantine. Tom Burke is in it, Zachary Hart. And there's something about Chekhov. He tends to draw actors like moths to a flame. There was a famous sequel years ago with Kristen Scott Thomas and Mackenzie Crook that was absolutely brilliant. So maybe this will follow suit.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, on to Shakespeare. Richard II.
Yes, this is very interesting. This is at the Bridge Theatre, of course, run by Nicholas Heitner, and Nicholas Heitner is directing it. He has just come off an extraordinary 2-year run of Guys and Dolls, which he also directed, which stormed London. And actually, I'm going to miss it because I went to see it, I think, 6 or 7 times, and I'm now sort of bereft that it's gone. But anyway, Richard II is a very good thing to have in, especially because the title role is being taken by Jonathan Bailey, who, of course, most people now know as Fiyero in the screen version of Wicked. He's coming up in a Jurassic Park reboot. But like most British actors, before he found film renown, he was a theatre person. And about 2 decades ago, he played Cassio in a terrific production of Othello at the National Theatre with Adrian Lester and Rory Kinnear, also directed by Nicholas Heitner. So Nicholas Heitner knew him then and now. So I think if anyone can deal with the kind of newly famous Jonathan Bailey, it will be Nicholas Heitner, who knows how to work with actors at various points in their career. It's a play I really love. I think it's Shakespeare's most luxuriant play in terms of the language. The supporting cast is very good. Amanda Root, Michael Simpkins. So, yes, I hope it'll be great.
And I mean, because we have seen some not particularly great Shakespeare versions with great Hollywood names in them.
Yes, the sort of misbegotten Sigourney Weaver, The Tempest, which is still trundling along. Although that will be followed by Tom Hiddleston and Haley Atwell in Much Ado About Nothing. So again, that should be an improvement.
Mm-hmm. And finally, tell us about Punch, which is transferring, isn't it, to the young Vic?
Well, this is a play that was first seen last spring in Nottingham, where some people reviewed it regionally, although I didn't see it there. It's by James Graham. And James Graham is sort of the it boy of the English theatre. I mean, everything he touches seems to turn to gold. He had Dear England, which is actually coming back to the National, this time with Gwilym Lee about Gareth Southgate, and the play Ink about Rupert Murdoch, Best of Enemies, buzz set amongst the world of American politics. Punch is based on a 2022 memoir called Right from Wrong, which is about a chap called Jacob Dunn, who was imprisoned at age 19 for manslaughter and went on to tell his tale. And the actor David Shields, who was in Master of the Air on television, is playing the role. And the word from it in Nottingham is great. I know that there's already interest in doing it in New York, which is fascinating because it hasn't yet been seen in London. So normally, you know, people wait to see what's the reception going to be in London. So for it to already be generated ahead of steam in New York shows you something about James Graham's popularity.
Absolutely. Matt, thank you very much indeed.
It's a pleasure.
That's Matt Wolfe. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Laura Kramer. Our studio manager was Lily Austin and our researcher was Maisie Ringer. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.